The Revolve CC team wants to acknowledge that we are currently living, working, traveling through, and celebrating our time on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy. More specifically, we are in the Gitche-Nabini Zibig, otherwise known as Marquette. We do land acknowledgements because strengthening our community means developing a consciousness of the downplayed history of oppression of the First Peoples here and the presence they still have in our community. To move forward with integrity, we must commit to recognizing the Anishinaabe and recognize that there is healing work to do in that relationship. The Revolve CC team is committed to learning more and doing better for our part as we grow this project. All right. Thank you so much for listening. The next artist that we have speaking with us has been one of my personal heroes for over 10 years. Their talent for creating melodies and lyrical prowess has inspired my own songwriting for many years. Last year, if you didn't hear, there was a pandemic. And during that pandemic, they were about to go on tour with Ani DiFranco to promote the Prison Music Project, a 10-year endeavor finally coming to fruition. In that time, we started to get acquainted through Zoom concerts that they held for their patrons, or matrons, as they call them, on Patreon. It was there that I saw their potential for public speaking and thought it was a fantastic opportunity to reach out to them and bring them up to New Orleans to speak at Revolve CC. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage musician, artist, and activist, Zoe Boekbinder.
I'm Zoe Bookbinder, and I'm going to talk to you, share an experience that I had of volunteering, teaching music inside of a prison, and how that brought me to prison abolition. So it started in 2010, and in 2010, I hadn't thought a lot about prison. No one close to me had ever been incarcerated. It wasn't something that impacted me personally or anyone that I was close to. And also, mass incarceration wasn't something that we heard about in the news back then. We do now, which is great. It's a step forward. But we didn't really hear about it much outside of more leftist media back then. So then I got the opportunity to perform inside of a prison, and I wasn't thinking politically about it. I just thought this would be an interesting experience. I'm going to say yes. And that's how I ended up in the parking lot outside of New Folsom, which is a maximum security men's prison outside of Sacramento, California. And I arrived around 8:30 in the morning, which is very early for a show. And I was there to play 3 shows because the guy who organizes and brings in artists to the prison, he figured this was the only time he was going to get me in there, so he wanted to put me in front of as many audiences as he could. So we go into the prison, there's all these checkpoints, and also before going into the prison, there was a criminal background check, and I had to wear certain clothes, and the prison was described to me, what to expect, what it would look like, what I would see, but there was really no amount of describing this place to prepare me for witnessing it firsthand. So we're going through all of these checkpoints, and I'm showing my ID and going through these doors that open by themselves and make sort of impressive sounds, clanking sounds. And the prison is these 3 buildings, these 3 big sort of complexes, A, B, and C. They are called, so creative. So first we go to C Yard, which is the general population. And in that section, I play in a library to an audience of about 30 incarcerated men. or they're all identified as men by the prison, but not all of them are. I want to acknowledge that. So in some ways, playing the concert is a lot like playing a concert anywhere else. The audience was above average, like attentiveness and responsiveness, which is awesome for me as a performer. That's always awesome. But things that stood out that were different, that struck me as strange, that I wasn't used to, was that everyone in the audience was wearing the same clothing. That's strange. There was an armed guard, also strange. And we're in a library, but I didn't see a lot of books, which I also found strange. So then I'm like whisked away to this other part of the prison because I'm playing 3 concerts in a matter of a few hours. So we go to this other part of the prison, and it's another library, and I play this concert, and I have very little time to interact with folks after each set. And then we go to the third part of the prison, which is called ADSEG, A-Yard, ADSEG, which stands for Administrative Segregation. And it's a higher security part of the prison, and people are sent to this part of the prison for different reasons. So some people, it's for psychiatric care, and for some, it's for safety. So if someone received violence, was a victim of violence in the general population, they might be sent there for their own safety. Also, solitary confinement is in this part of the prison. So when we were walking through the yard to get to the room that I was going to play in, I saw these big cages. Like, they looked like dog kennels, like these chain link cages sitting on cement pads. And I found out that that's where people in solitary confinement spent their yard time. And when they were being transported from, let's say, the yard back to their solitary cell, their ankles were cuffed and their hands were cuffed, and then they were chained at the waist and chained to each other in a line. And they were also wearing these white jumpsuits, so they looked different than the rest of the population. And this was it's a shocking thing to see. It's a shocking thing to see human beings in cages, and it's a shocking thing to see human beings chained up. It goes against, I think, everything in our beings to do that to each other and to witness that. So I was seeing that and thinking, well, that looks like something I didn't know made it into this century or even last century. It looks like a chain gang, so that's really strange. So we go to the room that I'm going to play in, and I'm playing for people who are generally in solitary confinement. So the audience comes in all chained to each other, and they're standing in a line outside of the room, and they're detached from each other one at a time, and then they kneel on this chair outside of the room and get their ankle shackles off, and then they're brought into the room and put into a cage. So the room is lined, the 3 walls of the room are lined with cages, and they're like the size of a telephone booth, just big enough for one person to sit or stand. There's a little metal stool in each one. So each audience member, each human being, is put into one of these cages. The door is closed and locked, and there's a little slot in the door that is opened, and this human being puts their hands out and gets their handcuffs off, and then that little slot is closed and locked, and they're behind metal. And in this room, I was supposed to wear a stab-proof vest, which seemed very strange because the quote-unquote dangerous people were behind metal, and there was even plexiglass on the top of the cage, so I couldn't even be spit on, let alone stabbed. But there I am, wearing this stab-proof vest with my acoustic guitar on top, and feeling pretty awkward because it's really hard to determine when your audience is in cages if they've chosen to be there. Because even if they chose to not be in their cell by themselves, maybe they didn't actually want to hear folk music. So that felt very strange. But I was there to play a show, so I just did. I played some songs, and at some point, I asked if anyone in the audience wanted to share a piece, a poem, a song, anything. And someone named Greg offers to perform a rap that he wrote. And when I left the prison that day, I still didn't know a lot about prisons, except what I had seen. I didn't really know about mass incarceration, any of the laws or the statistics. But I did know that that was the most impactful experience of my life, and I wanted to do it again. So I went back to the prison so many times that they started calling me the house band. And the guy who was bringing me in was like, you can't just keep playing concerts. That doesn't make any sense. You have to teach a workshop or something if you want to keep coming and hear this regularly. I was like, that makes sense. Okay, I've never taught a workshop. Okay, sure, I'll teach a workshop. So I was leading song circles and teaching songwriting workshops, and this brought about some collaborations with some of the people that I worked with in there, and Greg, who performed that rap from inside of the cage, ended up being one of the first people that I collaborated with. And I'm going to play his song. I want to preface this with, I was 25 when I started doing this work, and at this point it feels pretty strange to sing his words in my body, but I'm going to do it for you, but it's not something I normally do, but I do want you to hear this song, so I'm going to do it. But it does kind of feel strange, so just, I guess, picture Greg. He's like 6'2". He's about my age. At the time, he had long dreadlocks, really beautiful smile. Okay, picture that. Sorry, here's Monster. That he was a hustler. Mom got high by any means. Grams she ran a cold machine. Yeah, this shit runs in my jeans. My hustle started on the block, grinding. Dropped out of school 'cause the money had the kid blinded. Feeling no one can fade me. Got a baby. All I wanted was to be just like me. 'Cause I am a monster. You can call me the glorious. Seems I'm stuck here in this game. All I know is this street life, and it's a goddamn shame. Please understand, I really was never given a chance. I was pushed to the streets and forced to be a man. I had to show his side to those watching eyes, to prove my gangster would be upheld at all times. It is amazing how many of you hate me. Really, it don't pierce me, 'cause there are many more who praise me. 'Cause I am a monster. You can call me the glorious. Seems I'm stuck here in this game. All I know is this street life, and it's a goddamn shame. Gunplay from turf wars, leaving the block a ghost town. Never back down, I feel it in my reach. I'm about to get crowned. I'm a gutter baby forever, and that won't change. I was cut from a rare grade, and I'm married to the game. I know there's a better way, but I search and cannot find. They say do the right thing, I done tried so many times. When I beat on my chest, oh, that's just me. Out in this concrete jungle, boy, I am a beast. I am a monster. You can call me the glorious. Seems I'm stuck here in this game. All I know is this street life, and it's a goddamn shame. Oh, all I know is this street life, and it's a goddamn shame. Oh, it's a goddamn shame. Thank you. So Greg was released 3 years after I met him. And I don't know if you know much about recidivism. You probably do, because you're here at Revolve. Recidivism is when you go back to prison after you're released. And the rate of recidivism in the US is 76%, and that's within 5 years returning to prison. And it's a little bit higher, it's 81% for Black men, of which Greg is one. And that's because there's so many barriers to folks when they get out of prison. Like you can't live in public housing, you can't get food assistance like food stamps, you have to check a box when you're applying for a job or trying to get into school. So all of these really basic needs that we all need to survive, much harder if not impossible to get if you've just gotten out of prison. So 6 months after Greg got out, he was arrested. And I started having a lot of regrets and like feeling some responsibility, because when he got out, he had messaged me on Facebook, and I didn't respond because he knew I wasn't going to, because we talked about it before he got out, but I wasn't allowed to be in touch with folks on parole while I was actively teaching inside of the prison, so I didn't respond. And so 6 months later, he ended up in jail, and then he was convicted of several counts of robbery, and then possession of a firearm as a felon, possession of ammunition, and possession of ammunition as a felon. Those are all separate felony charges. And because in his first case, where he got sentenced to 7 years, he faced 2 felony convictions. Everything in this case was a third strike, because California has the 3 strikes law, and a third strike automatically carries a life without parole sentence. And instead of just giving him life without parole, they actually added up all the years for some, I think, cruelty maybe, I'm not sure. But they added up all the years, and it's 967 years that he was sentenced to. And so that's why laws like that are why our incarceration rate is the highest in the world, and why there's 17,000 people serving life without parole. They will die in prison, and they're there for nonviolent crimes. So I continue my work at the prison, and I collaborate with more folks inside. And I met this man named Alex Patrice, and part of the reason I was doing these collaborations was because I really wanted to share the experience this access that I had, really, because I was being radicalized. I didn't know that at the time. But I was like, oh my God, anyone who sees this will know that prisons shouldn't exist. How can I show them? So I couldn't take people inside with me, and I couldn't take prison out with me or the people out with me, but I could take their stories. And I'm going to share with you Alex's song, but I'm going to share it from his voice because I'd rather him tell his own story. And so this is kind of a weird thing because there's no visual. I'm just going to play you a track of Alex rapping and telling his own story.
Survivalist, I feel like I was meant to go to this. Would I be here without the fear I pushed through hell of shit? I wonder what would have happened if this didn't occur. I wonder where would I be at without my hook and verse. Asking my all the questions like I planted situations that I'm facing. Ain't nothing artificial, never faking, keep it tissue. I pushed through all the issues I have been through. Far as I could go back, my venting was my sports and music. I pursued it, distracting racing thoughts, ran from cops and broke the laws. Drugs and alcohol, what I was taught. Take a sip and reminiscing about my fam, cause I am missing all of y'all, but locked in prison, then they took my visits. Survivalist, I feel like I was meant to go to this. Would I be here without the fear I pushed through hell of shit? I wonder what would have happened if this didn't occur. I wonder where would I be at without my hook and verse.
Where would I be if this did not occur? Where would I be without my hook and verse?
October 17th, 1983, a young puppy was born, it must have been me. I was raised on the streets, but I've never been free. I lost my mother and daddy, my whole family. What else was I expected to be? Destined to see the penitentiary, I hope you're feeling me. I never lost nothing, cause I never had nothing. Always wanted something, but the government gon' take it. I wanted my mom, but she was smoking that crack. But can't blame her for that, the government supplying the sack. And then they want us locked up. It's fucked up how the children left all alone in the streets like stuck. How is it my fault that I became what I am when I never had no mother and I never had no dad? That's like blaming a child for not knowing how to read when he's never been to school, when he's never been teach.
Where would I be if this did not occur? Where would I be without my hook and verse?
They took your brother and sister away, placed you in a foster home with strangers, and all you can do is pray. And at age 11, I was ready to die. Put a rope around my neck, try to commit suicide. I was traumatized, I ain't afraid to admit it. I was conditioned to be mentally ill and criminal-minded. Memories stay rewinding, searching but never finding. Memories stay rewinding, searching but never finding. 18 years of age when I hit the penitentiary. Thought it was okay, but it was affecting my family. Reality kicking in and so mentally I had to get my shit together, cause I can't be here forever. Never will I ever self-destruct, cause I know I'm better. I know I've been going through things, but it's gotta change. And I ain't playing, most for a victim, but I maintain. Easily pushing through the pleasure, gotta push the pain. Hardest thing I ever had to deal with was the pride. Cause I'm from, if they disrespect for your ride. And where I'm from, that's the only way to survive. Pushing and striving, my way to stay alive. Survivalist, I feel like I was meant to go to this. Would I be here without the fear I pushed through hell of shit? I wonder what would have happened if this didn't occur. I wonder where would I be at without my hook and verse.
Where would I be if this did not occur? Where would I be without my hook and verse?
So I hope you could understand the lyrics there. Alex was talking about his childhood, mostly his early life, and how his mom was addicted to drugs and in and out of prison, and his dad wasn't around, and he was pulled away from his siblings and his family and put in foster care, and he was mostly in group foster homes, so not even with other families, but in these sort of anonymous group homes with other kids. And sort of raised in the system without this feeling of belonging. He was seeking a sense of family and found that in a gang. And those sort of main parts of his story, the main points, that trajectory, is something I heard over and over again in the prison. And I started to think, because that was so different from how I grew up, obviously. Maybe it's obvious. Anyway, it was. And I started to wonder if I was born into different circumstances, what would my life look like? And if my life looked like Alex's life, what kind of support would I need in order for that trajectory to change? And I was asking myself that question because Alex's release date was approaching, and Greg had gotten out a couple of years before, and having him go right back, I didn't want that to happen again, and I thought naively, maybe, what if I could offer some extra support that would make the difference? So I was there on his release day with his family and his girlfriend, and it was so incredible, such a beautiful reunion, and seeing him see the world for the first time as an adult, because he was locked up when he was 18, and 13 years later, he's 31. He's like seeing all these changes in the world, in technology, and being able to hug his mom, and all of these things he hadn't done in so long, and like eat non-prison food. And at one point during the day, he was eating with a metal fork, and he was like, wow, I haven't eaten with a metal fork in so long, which these like tiny things we don't even think about. So his situation actually looked really good. It looked a lot better than the situation Greg had been in, because Alex's family was really excited for him to come home, and they had a stable situation. His mom owned a house, and she had this little studio apartment in the back of it that she had gotten ready for Alex to live in, and he was surrounded by family. His aunt lived in another apartment in the house, so his cousin, he had everyone around him rooting for him and supporting him, and they made sure he got a driver's license and was able to get to his parole meetings, because they lived in Compton, and you need a car to get around. So his aunt hooked him up with a job. On paper, it looked like a really good situation, but pretty quickly it became clear that Alex wasn't safe in that neighborhood, because his mom lived in a Crip neighborhood, and Alex, while not active as a gang member at that point, was covered in tattoos that identified him as a Blood, including on his hands, on his face. There was really no way to cover this up. So he received death threats, even going from parking his car on the street to walking to his apartment. He was in fear. And so he told me he felt like he left one prison for another, and if something didn't change, he would end up dead or back in prison. So we were trying to come up with a solution so that didn't happen. And we had this mutual friend who he'd been incarcerated with, who was released a couple of years before Greg had been released, Nathan Jackson Brown. He was doing so well. He was looking at buying a house in Sacramento. He was starting a family, had a steady job, and was really passionate about helping other people leaving prison. And so I talked to him, and he was excited to offer Alex a place to live while he got on his feet and hook him up with a job. The thing is that when people are paroled, they're paroled to the county where they committed the crime that put them away. So I called Alex's parole officer, who I had become acquainted with, Officer Lee, and described the situation and told him that Alex was in fear. He was dealing with paranoia, and that he was fearful that he was going to die. It's pretty serious. So could you put in a request for a transfer? I knew this was a thing that could happen if someone tried hard enough. He refused. So that's frustrating. So then we're looking at different options. So I was looking into halfway houses, and any halfway house required a referral from the parole officer. So I called Officer Lee back, again, explained the situation, the seriousness of the situation, and asked if he could please put in a referral for a halfway house. And he said, Alex is a grown man, and he can take care of himself, and you need to stop meddling. Alex had been in the system in some sort of institution from age 10, except for 2 years between 16 and 18. So he'd actually never operated outside of prison as an adult. So I thought that was a pretty strange thing for him to say, because he knew all of that, obviously, because he was working with Alex and knew about his case. So we're looking for another option, and I'm looking into all these nonprofits that do reentry work in Los Angeles, and there are a lot of them, but none of them had the resources to offer the things that Alex needed, which was either job placement in a job that paid more than his, which was $9 an hour and would not help him pay LA rent, or safe housing. None of them could offer that. So, we're still trying to think of ideas. I'm like, I have some friends in LA, I'm like, can someone rent him a room for cheap enough? And, just coming up empty. Sure enough, like he said, 6 months after he was released, he was arrested for robbery, just like Greg. And just like Greg, in his first case, he'd gotten 2 strikes, so he was facing life without parole. And luckily, the state offered him a plea deal, and his mom begged him to take it, so he pled guilty in exchange for 5 years instead of risking fighting his case and getting life without parole. And our country, a lot of states have a law like that. They're not all called the third strike law, but a lot of states have it. And we're one of 2 countries in the world who have a law like that. And that's why 10% of our prison population is serving life without parole, meaning they will die in prison. And I worked with a lot of people who were serving life without parole because I was working in a maximum security prison. A lot of that population was serving life without really any hope of getting out, except if laws change. So please vote. And also, they could get pardoned or get clemency or get their sentence commuted, but that's something that the governor or the president does, so it's super slim chance. One person that I worked with who was serving life without parole is named Ken, and Ken is 79 years old and the best songwriter I've ever met. And he taught me a few of his songs, gave me permission to play them, which I feel honored by. This one is called All Over Again. There's a blue sky outside my window, and there's never a trace of rain. You've been gone so long this time, little girl. I think I'm over you, over again. Yes, I think I'm over you, over again. I no longer think of the loving you must be giving to some other man. I don't even miss that sweet tender kiss. Yes, I think I'm over you, over again. Yes, I think I'm over you, over again. It's true, there are times when my heart stops, when I think I see your face in a crowd. tired of leaving. Maybe someday I'll be through with the pain. Till then, I'll just have to tell myself I think I'm over you. Over again. Yes, I think I'm over you. Over again. Yes, I think I'm over you. Over again. So it's predicted that 1 in 3 Black men will be incarcerated at some point in his life. And the same is true for 1 in 6 Hispanic men and 1 in 17 white men. And that's a really big difference, but that number is still really high. So that should be noted. Also, indigenous people are incarcerated at astronomical rates, and the fastest growing population in prison is Black women and girls. And part of that is because the rates of drug use and drug dealing are pretty equal across race, but Black women and girls are the most likely to be arrested for it. And race obviously plays a huge factor in incarceration rate, in likelihood of incarceration. And another big factor, which is not unrelated to race, is economics. The average income for incarcerated people before they were incarcerated is 40% lower than the national average. And as our incarceration rate is rising, prison populations are rising, sentences are getting longer, punishments are getting harsher, the crime rate, pretty much the same. So if it's not keeping us safer, why are we doing it? I think people have ideas. Oh, yes. Buddha's going like this. Yes. Correct, class. That is the reason. And there's so many ways to profit off of incarceration if one wants to. One of the ways is through prison labor. And one person that I worked on a song with, which I will play for you, but I'm going to tell you about this first. He authored a bill called the California Abolition Act, which you probably know that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery with the exception of people who had been committed of a crime. So slavery is still happening legally in this country today. And Samuel Brown authored this bill, and it's being championed by California Assembly member Sidney Kamlager. So it has a chance. Maybe slavery will truly be abolished, starting in California and hopefully spread to other states. But it's incredible, from inside prison, Samuel authored this bill and made all these connections and is making this happen, and it has traction. So I'm going to let you hear from Samuel. I'm going to play another recorded track for you so you can hear his voice. And this recording was made over the phone, so it's not quite as clear as Alex's, but hopefully you can still understand what he's saying.
You can't be too cool to see that in life and all alright. You really you went tripping, but you slipping, there will never be. I'm steady harassed by cops, but you ain't trippin'. Know the owner of the shop, but you ain't trippin'. It's a trip that you ain't trippin'. Trip dog, who trippin'? Just lose the underfunded, but you ain't trippin'. Feel contented from the back, but you ain't trippin'. So the top to get you crack, but you ain't trippin'. You don't know what it means to be black. Why you ain't trippin', but not trippin'? I think you wanna be. I'm trippin' cause you was a part of me that's not moving accordingly. So regret me down, we wanna be responsibility to tell you get yourself together. Partner only actions are responsible. Push you up and get the sharpest, but then y'all finna get to who you the night. Probably might, maybe some of the baby body, you can't rock a white. I'm sorry, but I'm not the type that puts me for the sugar coat. As soon as you go, we can talking about the that you should've wrote, all the books you should've read, all the things you should've did. Instead of sitting in the tent and bragging about it when you took the bed, I pity the kid for stuff with you. So the chick that fuck with you, treat her like she don't exist and treat them like they under you. Acting like it's wonderful as long as you feel comfortable. I hear like she lollipops and doing the things that stuff with you. We don't need to fuck with you. It's high time to come and new. Get pissed when you hit it, but you need to take a number two. Cause man, you're so full of ish, I can manage some bully ish, trying to conceal the real. You feel so powerless, making out your resurrection, taking lyrical hourless with us. The polished knowledge is what understanding powers. It's not exclusive to colleges and colleges or scholarships. Searching positive domination, you can be compounding it. Add a little confidence, accomplishment, big fundamentals, and I'm trying to spread your web, that's my
It can be too cool to see that in life and on these streets, you don't hustle and you don't eat, you don't struggle, you don't get free. How can it be cool to not be free? I just want for you what I want for me, and that's for us to be.
Alright. You took this, you went tripping, but you slipping, there will never be. Alright. You took this, you went tripping, but you slipping, there will never be. Like unjust labor and civil unrest, so put your hands up, put your feet up, more stuff, capital and I can follow feet up. No more gym clothes, put the belly at the feet up, till we feel free up, we will not ease up, no. Put your hands up, put your feet up, more Johnny capital and I can follow streets up. No more gym clothes, put the belly at the feet up.
So prison labor is not the only way that people are profiting off of caging people. Another way is all the services that are provided inside prisons, even state and federal prisons. Sometimes the security, always the medical services, the food, the communication. Global Telink charges an arm and a leg for a phone call to a loved one. And in that case, it's the families paying the price. And then there's also the vendors. So there's these approved vendors that incarcerated people can order from to get their prison-approved clothing, electronics, books, magazines, music. And they can charge whatever they want because there's no competition. And all of these companies, the ones that use prison labor, like Starbucks and Victoria's Secret, and then all of these ones that offer the services, they all belong to this lobbying group, and they work with politicians to make sure that sentences get longer, prison population rises along with their profits. And someone I've talked to a lot about profit in prison is Nathan Jackson Brown, who's the one that was going to help Alex out. He is so passionate about helping folks get out of prison. He wants to open a reentry house. And he wrote 2 poems that he gave me permission to use. And the main one in this song I'm about to play you is called Walls, and I think you'll see why. The song is called Villain, and we made an album. The group of us that made it, some incarcerated, some not, we are the Prison Music Project, and the album is called Long Time Gone, and the song is on it, and I don't sing it on the album. Nathan's goddaughter sings it, and she's such an incredible vocalist, Aranessa Turner. You can order that album on the internet. It was released last year, as Alex said in my intro, so professionally. Yeah, I would encourage you to go listen to Aranessa's version of this song. But here's mine. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. Even you remain, tails locked inside, intricate puzzles, tales of lost lives. You trap us in green grass, looks good. Sweating bodies running barefoot. Wild men you can keep, most of us will never leave, but you can't keep out the heat. There's more than one kind of release. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. Cool and constant, you put up a solid fight. I press my body against you to escape the heat of the night. Still and silent against my vicious blows, I remain grateful in your shadow. Though you are a comfort, I'd love to watch you fall. Gamblers are still betting, and you're still a concrete wall. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. You love to call me a villain. You're making a killing, a killing. So we need a way to respond to violence and to harm. We do need a way to hold people accountable to their actions. So if prison's not working, if the criminal legal system isn't working, what other kind of justice, what can we do? In one way that I know about, you may have heard of it too, is restorative justice. That's rooted in indigenous peacemaking processes. And Samuel Brown, who, California Abolition Act, he brought this workshop into New Folsom Prison on restorative justice. He and I have talked about it a lot, and one day we were talking about it over the phone, and he said, you know who you should really talk to about this is my friend Lester, because he went through a restorative justice process with one of the survivors of his crime, and he's actually walking by the phone right now, so can I hand it to him? "Hi, Lester. Nice to meet you." There's like 5 minutes left on this recorded call that's being interrupted by this rude voice to let me know that it's recorded. But in that time, Lester tells me this incredible story, which later he tells me in much more detail. And it starts, he's 18 years old, the day after he graduated high school. He had been a star student, a star athlete, never gotten in trouble with the law. And he ends up hanging out with this group of guys who he's noticed have very nice things, nicer things than he has, and he wants those nice things. And someone from their crew is missing that day. And Lester was a football player. He's very tall, very large boy at this point, right? So they asked him if he could take their friend's place and commit this robbery. Unfortunately, he says yes. So they break into a home, the family's home. Horrific violence occurs. Not everyone survives. They're all caught immediately, and one of the survivors of the crime fights to get Lester life without parole because she doesn't want him to ever get out of prison. He was going to get life, but she pleaded with the judge, and the judge gave him life without parole. So he's 10 years into his sentence, and he gets a letter from Cheryl Ward. This is the person who fought to get him life without parole, the woman who survived this robbery that he was a part of. And he's thinking, why is Cheryl Ward writing me a letter? Is it to tell me what a terrible human I am and how I've ruined her life and she's so angry? Curiosity gets the best of him. He opens the letter. To his surprise, she's not expressing anger, and in fact, she's inviting him to do this process he's never heard of before, called Restorative Justice, and it's a reconciliation and a chance for healing. And he's terrified by the idea of facing this person who he's harmed worse than he's ever harmed anyone, and also just kind of the worst one can harm another person without killing them, I guess. And but he's also thinking, I like to put myself in his place sometimes. Like, I have a hard time facing, like, someone who I cut off in traffic, You know what I mean? It's very intimidating to own up to your mistakes. So he's going to own up to this massive mistake, and the way he would say it is face the truth of what I did. So he thinks, no matter how hard this is going to be, if I have a chance to repair at all any of the harm that I did, I have to do this. So he writes back, he says yes. And he starts going to therapy in preparation for this. And so he spends months in therapy. And there's a facilitator who's going to guide this conversation, and that person is also meeting with Lester and meeting with Cheryl for months in advance, getting them ready. Because the point of restorative justice is healing, not punishment. And so they're both trying to show up without walls up. So Cheryl describes the drive to the prison that day, 3-hour drive. She doesn't play any music. She just repeats to herself over and over, shields down. And Lester, sitting in the waiting area before he goes in to face her for the first time, thinks, be naked. I had to ask him what he meant by that. He meant emotionally naked. So finally, they meet each other face to face, and they talk for 6 hours, and it's way too much to share with you right now because I think I'm running out of time. I'm going to talk a lot faster. Okay, here we go. So where was I? Yes, okay. So what Lester would like you to know about that 6-hour conversation is that it ended with them both eating trail mix and sharing out of the same bowl. And what Cheryl would have you know is that to this day she is fighting to get him out of prison. And sometimes the songwriting process is like a pulling a song out of me, and other times it's like all I need to do is just open up, and then I'm just the conduit, and a song just flows through me. And so one day this song taps on my shoulder, and I pick up my guitar, and it just comes rushing out of me. And it's called The Rest of His Days.
my friend, it's such a shame when he was young, hurt by someone, and he'll pay with the rest of his days. 9 years later, or nope, 9 years later, and a secret kept. I guess the writing process was easier than playing it for you. 9 years later, and a secret kept. The pain like a poison through him crept. He wore armor made of fear. He couldn't show weakness, couldn't shed a tear. One day he could not carry the weight. Thought he could pass on his pain as hate. He thought he could give it to someone, pass it on through the barrel of a gun. Oh, my friend, it's such a shame. When he was young, he hurt someone, and he'll pay with the rest of his days. 9 years later, laying on his bunk, 9 years sitting with the truth of what he'd done. He wasn't waiting, but a letter came. On the envelope he read her name. He read it over and over in his cell. Her words quenched him like water from a well. She said, God forgives you, and so do I. I think it's time we reconcile. Oh, my friend, it's such a shame. When he was young, he hurt someone, and he'll pay with the rest of his days. Oh, the rest of his days. Oh, the rest of his days. He'll pay with the rest of his days. She took off her anger, he took off his shame. They met unguarded face to face. He saw her sorrow, she saw his pain. They put love where there once was hate, but he'd still be punished by the state. Oh, my friend, it's such a shame. When he was young, he hurt someone, and he'll pay with the rest of his days. Oh, the rest of his days. Oh, the rest of his days. Oh, the rest of his days. He'll pay with the rest of his days. I don't know about you, but when I think about this tangled mess of the criminal legal system and what it would take to make it something functional, I can feel very overwhelmed. And then I remember that it's not my job alone, and there's a lot of really smart people coming up with really great ideas. One of them is Samuel Brown with the California Abolition Act, and Samuel says, remove the opportunity for anyone to profit from caging people. And Lester and Cheryl, along with a lot of other people, say let's respond to harm with a focus of healing instead of punishment. And then Dr. Angela Davis takes that a step further, and a lot of abolitionists like her take it a step further and say, well, instead of responding to harm, what about looking at why it's happening in the first place and address that issue? And so when we're looking at the communities that are the most impacted by incarceration, we're looking at low-income communities, Black communities, communities of color, Indigenous communities. What can we do, everybody, all of us together, what can we do to lift those communities up, keep those communities safe, just like every community, so that all together we can rise? I don't believe it keeps us safe. Darling, it's all about money. Nothing is too precious, honey. It's all about the money, honey. Rise, rise. Laying bodies like bricks building spires. Somebody's building empires, leaving behind a trail of fire. From the ash rises a choir. Rises a choir. Rise, rise, rise. Muffled voices through the wall. High price paid for a phone call. We